All that, and some people lost loved ones. When you have all of that come together, it's you can't imagine a type of tragedy, a citywide catastrophe, not even rivaled by September 11th.
2 years later, much of New Orleans still feels temporary. The wreckage is still overwhelming. The recovery still unfolding. It's impossible to directly link Katrina to global warming. The process that forms hurricanes is too complex. But many in New Orleans want to know if more Katrinas or worse are in their future.
After seeing what Hurricane Katrina has done and what it's continuing to do today, you would think people would at least want to start to get serious about figuring out this global warming deal and what that really means and what they can do.
In 2005, Katrina seemed like the storm of the century. But if the planet warms by 3 degrees, we could be in for a new generation of superstorm.
In a world which is warmer, then the hurricanes will essentially have a lot more energy to drive them. And so the most powerful hurricanes which we currently see in today's climate are Category 5. We could actually see hurricanes which are half or more category higher than that, Category 6 storms.
Imagine it's decades later. New Orleans is looking down the barrel of an unprecedented megastorm, the first Category 6 storm to threaten the rebuilt city. What if Katrina is only a hint at the magnitude of destruction climate change could cause? If the Earth reaches +3 degrees, over the next 40 or 50 years, the planet's basic life support systems could begin to break down. But beyond 3 degrees, the science of global warming becomes more and more speculative and more frightening. If the world warms by 4 degrees, oceans rise, overtaking heavily populated deltas, home to 1 billion people. Bangladesh washed away. Egypt inundated. Venice submerged. Glaciers disappear, shutting off the flow of fresh water to billions more. Northern Canada becomes one of the planet's most bountiful agricultural zones, while a beach in Scandinavia could be the next Saint-Tropez. The entire West Antarctic ice sheet could collapse, sending sea levels rising even further. This could be our world, +4 degrees.
At 4 degrees, we really do begin to see a planet which is completely unrecognizable from the one we know today. We will see the possible drying up of some of the most important rivers in the world, and this will endanger the survival of tens and even hundreds of millions of people.
If the planet is ever 4 degrees warmer, one of its great rivers will be self-destructing at both ends, from a high mountain glacier to the Indian Ocean. Locals call it Mother Ganges, the holiest river in India, perhaps in all the world. Millions of devout pilgrims gather each year in a mass ritual to celebrate the river's birthday. When it is said the goddess Ganga came to earth to save her people from drought. Himalayan rivers are the wellspring of life for over 1 billion people in China, Nepal, and India.
If Ganges is not there, then it will not be in India. It will be a desert in the world.
Climate scientists predict India could be one of the countries where the impact of global warming takes its greatest toll. Unless we begin to slow global warming, in fewer than 4 decades, the Ganges could be a river fighting for its very life. The battle will be fought here, in the vast crystalline ice fields of the Himalayan glaciers, the planet's largest store of fresh water outside of the polar ice caps. Himalayan glaciers are receding, the fastest of any in the world. Few have ventured here to the headwaters of the Ganges as often as one man.
We used to have 8 to 15 feet of snow in a single night. Now you barely get 1.5 to 2 feet of snow during the entire season. The Ganges River will become a desert, and all you will see in her place is a dirty creek, not a thing of beauty.
Swami Sundaranand, an 80-year-old holy man known as the Swami who clicks, has been photographing the glaciers above the Ganges for 50 years.
1956
The first photo I took of the glacier was in 1956. After 1962, I started to worry about the changes I was seeing in the glacier. I went to this glacier on foot in 1965, to the base of Meru Peak. When I went back after 15 years, the glacier had vanished. When I saw the glacier receding, I became very worried and started crying. If the holy Ganges is not in existence in the future, the entire world will seem like it has become an orphan.
The Swami's trove of icescapes documents 50 years of change to this magnificent glacier. Now, NASA satellite imagery confirms the rate of loss. Side by side, the high and low-tech images tell a similar story, one that spells danger for the future. Literally following in the Swami's footsteps is a new generation of climbers, lured by the pilgrimage to the glacial ice cave that gives the Ganges its life. When Nadish Sharma was a boy, his father was an early summiter of Everest. Since the late 70s, he's climbed the Ganges Glacier 30 times.
In 1978, this place Bhojwasa, there used to be a dense forest of silver birch. And now, there is not a single tree.
The glacier holds millions of tons of ice. Nearly 20 cubic kilometers worth sustains the Ganges as it begins its descent to the Indian Ocean. This was all glacier once, before it started shrinking 30 meters a year. Just a century ago, this stone marked the edge of the ice field that has retreated high up the mountain.
I am sad because I have seen this glacier, my father has seen this glacier, but probably Maybe my children or their children may not be able to see this, which is the most holiest thing for we Hindus.
If current trends continue, the next 100 years could wreak havoc on agriculture, hydroelectric power, transportation, mining, and wildlife all along the Ganges. At first, the melt might unleash unprecedented floods. But then, seasonal water scarcity and famine could strike year-round once the glacier vanishes completely. At the current rate of loss, it's estimated there will be no more glaciers in the Himalayas by the year 2035, dramatically reducing the flow of fresh water to more than 1 billion people.
There are people depending upon this fresh water from the glaciers, but most of them will be gone if we have global warming of 3 or 4 degrees Celsius.
And that will lead to tens of millions of climate refugees having to go and find somewhere else to live. Pretty scary stuff.
At +4 degrees, different parts of the world will face very different kinds of problems, with only one thing in common. They will all be extreme. At 4 degrees of warming, sea level could be rising by 1 meter as the world's great coastal cities confront catastrophe. Among them, the largest and most densely populated metropolis in the United States. Surrounded by water, New York will no longer seem like an invulnerable fortress if it's up against storm surges powered by global warming.
There's a Federal Hall here, Stock Exchange behind me. We're probably at about 15 feet above sea level, Alex.
Right.
The year 2050,
At +4 degrees, this could be beachfront property.
flood to this level as well.
Same damage.
So now we're moving up to Broadway.
Armed with elevation maps and climate forecasts, Professor of Geophysics Malcolm Bowman and one of his graduate students plot the course future flooding could take through New York's financial district.
What will happen, there could be massive flooding in parts of New York City, parts of Manhattan here, especially the lower part. We could say that could be the flood line for a Category 3 hurricane hitting at high tide, a direct hit on New York City.
Even a Category 2 or 3 storm could submerge the financial capital of the world. New York is supremely vulnerable, both above and especially below the city streets, where much of the city's infrastructure is below sea level. The utilities that power New York are all buried underground: electric, water, and one of the most extensive subway systems in the world. Without them, the city would shut down.
The subway system is always fighting water. We pump almost 10 million gallons of water a day out of our subway system. We are, in many cases, the lowest point of New York City, lower than the sewer system.
If millions of liters of water are already flooding into New York's subway system every day, imagine the scope of the problem as ocean levels rise. For New York City, the problem is no longer theoretical. They have brought in one of the federal government's most technologically advanced agencies to assess the impact global warming may have. This NASA team uses computer models the same way generals calculate battle scenarios. These are war games. New York City versus a superstorm surge as sea levels continue to rise.
And we don't necessarily notice the effects here in a major city like New York of, say, a 1 or 2 foot sea level rise every day, but we do notice it when a storm arrives.
People's houses are going to be flooded. They're going to have to be evacuating.
Computer simulations reveal a city in the wrong place at the wrong time. For a long time, disaster scenarios were based on the catastrophic 100-year event. In a world warmer by 4 degrees, they could come every 4 or 5 years.
We're not just talking about rising sea level, we're talking about huge dislocations. I think it's a catastrophic scenario for humankind.
If a megastorm hits on top of a major sea level rise, it will mean destruction on an epic scale. Parts of the city could be 7.6 meters underwater. One thing is clear: unless we limit the impact of global warming, major coastal cities will have to spend many billions of dollars to protect themselves. Various kinds of flood barriers are already on the drawing board, including colossal sea gates that can be opened and closed when a storm surge hits. New York would have to build 3 massive sea gates. One around the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, blocking the entrance to the harbor, another behind Staten Island, and a third blocking the entrance to Long Island Sound. Anticipating a storm surge, massively powerful hydraulic engines rotate gates weighing thousands of tons, 9 meters out of the water. These sea barriers on the Thames cost Great Britain more than $1 billion, but they're protecting London from sea surges more and more frequently every year. At least major industrial nations have the option of mega engineering projects, with the technology to protect themselves and the resources to pay for it. It's likely to be a very different story in poorer countries that haven't contributed nearly as much of the greenhouse gases causing their disasters.
Can you dike this entire planet? No, you can't. And I think that's what we really need to be worried about.
Dr. Rajendra Pauchari chairs the Nobel Prize-winning panel on climate control.
I'm worried all the time at the direction that the world has taken in this day and age, which is not sustainable.
At the upper limits, plus 5 and 6 degrees, the effects of climate change are much more difficult to predict. Beyond that, genuine disaster scenarios could become a reality. If the world warms 5 degrees, 2 massive uninhabitable zones spread into once temperate regions of the northern and southern hemispheres. Snowpack and aquifers that feed the world's great cities, Los Angeles, Cairo, Lima, Bombay, are drying out. Climate refugees number in the hundreds of millions. This could be our world plus 5 degrees.
I think in a world which is much warmer than now, 5 degrees, it's going to be inconceivable that human civilization can withstand that kind of a climatic shock.
Now we enter the twilight zone of climate change, a nightmare vision of life on Earth. Perhaps most frightening of all is how much we can't know. Traditional social systems would break down.
I think it's the poor everywhere that are going to suffer, because if you take the example of, say, Hurricane Katrina, which I'm not saying was necessarily caused by human-induced climate change, who were the worst sufferers in the city of New Orleans? The poorest of the poor. They were just left behind.
The best way to survive the catastrophe of a hotter planet is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Failing that, we may be confronting far more difficult choices.
The survivor of the future is mobile. Mobility is the key. You've got to be able to get from place to place. If you think that you can hunker down in one area, you're wrong.
Eitan Edwards travels around the country offering personal preparedness training designed to survive disasters like the chaos of a climate meltdown.
Katrina was our lesson, but Katrina was a lesson that's going to be repeated again.
Edwards is convinced survival is just a matter of planning ahead and a little ingenuity. His gadgets are low-tech but effective.
In New York City, because there's so many windows and doors that you've got to move through and get out, a critical tool would be a mini pry bar. I carry mine with me all the time.
It's not likely we'll reach +5 degrees in our lifetime, but Edwards has prepared everything he and his family might need, just in case.
Now what we have here is what I call the urban nomad bag. And that means you're going to basically have a bag that is your home. So you need everything that you have in your home in the bag.
If the worst should happen, Edwards is ready to become a New Age hunter-gatherer, carrying what he needs on his back, living off the resources he finds along the way.
Well-stocked first aid kit. These are toiletries. You can put about 5 gallons of water in this. Regular old ramen noodles. Old military mess kit. This is a 6-person tent. People don't think that you can actually have, carry your home with you. There is no more permanence. In fact, they should probably remove the word permanence from the dictionary at this point. It's the death of permanence. It's all about mobility.
If we allow global warming to take off that far, I really do see a situation where we have conflict across vast areas of the globe as the people who remain and the people who survive fight it out with each other for what remains of the world's resources.
And it can get even worse. If the world warms by 6 degrees, from a distance, the oceans may appear bright blue, but they are marine wastelands. Deserts march across continents like conquering armies. Natural disasters become common events. Some of the world's great cities are flooded and abandoned. This could be our world plus 6 degrees.
Warmings of 6 degrees over longer time periods have been associated with some of the most devastating mass extinctions which have ever taken place. So it's certainly fair to assume that if temperatures soar by 6 degrees within less than a century, that we're going to face nothing less than a global wipeout.
6 degrees of warming has been called the doomsday scenario. Our lives would never be the same again. But it's not all doom and gloom yet. Most experts believe we can awaken from the nightmare. Right now, the average temperature has only risen 0.8 degrees Celsius. But we don't have much time. 2 degrees hotter puts us on the brink of runaway global warming, when it could dramatically disrupt how we live our lives.
The scientific reality seems to be that we have to, if at all possible, peak global emissions within the next 10 years, or by 2015. And this, of course, is an extremely tight timetable. We're talking about turning around the energy supply for most of humanity within the space of a decade.
For anyone looking for solutions, there's no place like home. This is the Cohen residence, a pleasant 3-bedroom in Snowmass, Colorado. But lurking beneath the surface, an energy-eating monster. More than half the electricity in the United States goes into buildings in one form or another. Many homes waste more energy than they use. A team of eco-detectives is investigating the Cohen house for crimes against the climate.
This innocent-looking thing here, when it is on, eats a whole lot of money. When I feel this much cold on the outside of the freezer, I know that the insulation is really not as thick as we would like. Oh, what have we here? Climate change is a problem we don't need to have, and it's cheaper not to.
For Amory Lovins, solutions start with efficiency.
Up on the ceiling.
Reducing the use of energy that produces CO2 emissions.
I think once people understand that climate protection puts money back in your pocket because you don't have to buy all that fuel, political resistance is going to melt faster than glaciers. Do you see that little red light down in the corner?
Lovins is a sort of New Age meter reader, hell-bent on killing wasted watts.
If you have all kinds of appliances, you know, your TV, your VCR, your DVD, etc., that have that little light on, yes, they're using electricity. It's called vampire loads.
109 watts, almost $60 a year just sitting there turned off.
If every household in the U.S. killed off their wasted vampire loads, we could eliminate at least 18 coal-fired power plants. Lovins doesn't just talk the talk. He lives in a house he designed without a furnace in Aspen, Colorado, where temperatures in winter routinely drop below -17 Celsius.
We're at 7,100 feet here. It can go to -47 F, get frost any day of the year, and we can get 39 days of continuous midwinter cloud.
Lovin's house is a mix of high technology and homespun common sense. Solar units on the roof produce more electricity than the house uses. The entire house runs on just 120 watts, slightly more than a single light bulb.
Energy efficiency is the biggest, fastest, cheapest way to solve the climate problem, to save money, and to make a safer, richer, fairer, cooler world.
Next to our homes, the second largest source of emissions we're responsible for is parked right outside. Cars produce nearly 20% of global greenhouse gases. Nowhere is the problem of emissions from transportation more urgent than in developing countries, especially China. Rising affluence has paved the way to many of the perks of middle-class life, like owning a car. The numbers are staggering. So are the emissions. 14,000 new cars hit the road every day.
I don't think we can turn around to the Chinese and say, I'm sorry, we need to save the future of the planet. The rich countries have to take the lead, and we have to cut our emissions in a much more dramatic sense in order to allow some room for growth in the poorer countries.